The relationship is the asset.
Welcome to the Waste No Day podcast, a podcast specifically for and about the home services industry as it relates to plumbing, heating, air conditioning, and electrical. More than a podcast, Waste No Day is a credo, a determination, a mindset. It is a never-ending discipline. It is a refuse to lose pursuit. It is a wake-up call every morning to waste no day. Now here's your hosts, Brian Burton and Nate Minnick.
Hey, welcome to another episode of the Waste No Day podcast. Your host, Nate and Brian, hanging out with you again. Looking forward to an excellent episode today. We have Lieutenant Colonel Scott Mann joining us to talk about the fact that nobody is coming to save you. It's going to be a great episode. This guy has so much to talk about, so much story to go through. We're only going to scratch the surface of everything that he is about and what he has done in his life and his experiences. It's going to be great content today. We're looking forward to it. And man, I've already started his book, fantastic in there. It's going to be so much more as we dive into the episode today. Looking forward to it, Brian. But as we always do, we're going to spend a little bit of time setting the stage for you ourselves. And we're going to kick it off with a quote.
Be generous with your scars. Lieutenant Colonel Scott Mann.
Oh, boy. That seems like something that we should ask him about and like dive deep on what that means, because it's not just a couple words in a quote. I'm sure it came from like a really rough couple stories or something, you know?
Yeah, it's funny if you have someone start telling a story of something that happened yesterday. It's cool, right? And you're like, you can't wait to get to the end to kind of hear what the crescendo. If it's a guy telling a story, if it's a woman telling a story, there's no crescendo. It's just going to go on forever. I'm kidding. Coral, Whale, and the other two women who listen to this show, please don't hit me up on social media. It's a joke. Who has time to read all that testing? But if you have someone tell a story where there's like pain, trauma, scars involved, so to speak, where they're telling you like a story of pain or triumph or something stressful that they're dealing with, and maybe even asking for advice, like that kind of story grabs us, right? It's like the difference between an episode of Seinfeld, right? Where there's an arc and there's a problem in every episode that has to get dealt with. And there's great humor and awesome writing and good wit. But you're never like, if you pause an episode of Seinfeld, if you're just running through it like before bed at night, all the reruns, if you fall asleep to an episode, you're not like jumping back on Netflix and trying to rewind season 6, episode 13, right?
12 minutes, 30 seconds. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the same. That's kind of a just lighthearted story. There's an arc. It's fun. You want to know what happens, but it's not the end of the world if you don't find out, right? But if you watch Interstellar and you fall asleep an hour and 20 minutes in, like you're not done with that movie. At some point, if you're like me, you have to get back to that movie and find out how that story arc came to conclusion, like what ended up happening. In any really good movie, there's a really painful story arc where the main character is going through something pretty severe. And if it's written and directed and acted well, you've got to get back to it. Right? So us telling stories, that's it. Be generous with your scars. And he talks about so much in the book that there's healing for other people in the stories of your scars. It seems like a selfish act. And I was talking to the team I was training this morning, and I was saying like, be forthright about why you're in the trade you're in, and even maybe where you would be otherwise. And you could even talk about what this trade saved you from. And I told them like, oftentimes depend on the situation, but certainly in a situation on a service call, I might say, hey, the plumbing trade saved me from a life of crime and probably prison and probably death, because I was selling drugs before I got into plumbing. That's what I was doing. And guess what happened to all the guys I grew up with who were doing that? Almost all. Very, very few left who are still either alive or not in prison. And kind of in unison, everybody said, bro, you come knock on my door to do a plumbing job and you hit me with that. Like that's a lot of weight to put on me. And I'm like, you feel like that as the person who would have to deliver that story. But believe me, if I just walked up to you and I'm not like a solar salesman, like I didn't just randomly knock on your door. You called us out, right? We accepted your invitation to come to your home. And I said, hey, before we get started, just a little bit to know about me. I'm third generation plumber, and thank God for plumbing, because if not for the plumbing trade, I'd probably still kind of be in poverty in Detroit with the guys I grew up with and the people I grew up around. And that was heading in a direction that would have probably left me dead or in prison. And I'm thankful every day that I get to get up and be involved in this trade. And for people like yourself, who, due to the fact that you called us out, means I get to keep practicing this trade. So I'd stick my hand out and say, just to let you know, I greatly appreciate you. Who's going to feel like offended by me saying that at your front door?
Right. Yeah.
The sketched out part comes from me / you feeling like I have to deliver this message. And that's the uncomfortable part. That's the part that makes you squirm. It's not what your client's going to react with. And I don't mean I look through the living room window as I'm walking up to the door and I can see the water from the second floor pouring through the ceiling of the living room. And I'm going to go, hold on, give me 30 seconds. I got to tell them, I don't mean that. But in the 95% ish of your calls, of your service calls that you run in whatever home service trade you're in, that's not the case. Like, you're going to have an introduction period. And I think it's a great idea to have a story, and even in some capacity, small as it may be, share a scar or two and let the people see you as a human being. Because that's where the decision's made on what company to go with, whether I trust these recommendations, whether I believe this person is after my best interest or the best interest of their own wallet. That's where the decision's made. So when our clients can see us like human beings and resonate with us and even empathize with us, you have a much better shot of building the relationship. And make no mistake, been really, really working through this with our team here in Phoenix lately. You get paid, if you're in any kind of performance-based system, you get paid to make relationships. That's what you get paid to do. So if you want to see your conversion rate go up, build more relationship. If you want to see it go down, spend less and less time on your calls every day. Start treating it like a call you have to get through, instead of a human being that you get to interact with and build a relationship with.
It's that relationship piece that makes storytelling so compelling, and the storytelling creates more relationship. Like when you find out somebody's story, or even just like parts of a story, it makes that person more human, generally more interesting, more intriguing. Just sort of like, I don't know, if you see somebody's tattoo on their arm and you're kind of like, I wonder what that's about. And maybe they tell you, and maybe they tell you a surface level story, or maybe they go into it and they, hey, what do those numbers on your arm mean? Oh, well, that's my grandfather's birthday. Your grandfather's birthday. Why do you have your grandfather's birthday tattooed on your arm? Well, my grandfather was a World War II veteran, and I just always looked up to him, et cetera, et cetera. And you're like, wow, a simple question, a simple conversation, and now I'm way more engaged with the person. We're way more on a human level. The defenses are starting to melt away, all because of the power of story. And Scott has a fantastic story, not just one, but story after story after story that have all come together into his life story. And it's one of intrigue and interest. It's one of sadness and power. And we're only going to scratch the surface of that today, unfortunately, due to time. But it's going to reveal for us, I think, the power of what story can do, not only for you, for your clients as well, for your family, your relationships, and so much more. Really looking forward to the episode today, Brian.
Yeah, I feel like it could easily be our first Joe Rogan-esque 4-hour and 15-minute episode.
That'd be awesome. We'll have to see if Scott's up for that sometime.
Well, I wouldn't just slam that on him at 8:30 at night his time, but I'm guessing he would, because he just enjoys telling his stories and telling stories, and it would be fun to maybe do like a bonus episode where we just release it on a Wednesday and it's just like, listen if you want when you can, and just have hours of Uncle Scott's storytelling hour.
Yeah. You know who else likes telling stories, Brian? Sometimes our reviewers like telling stories about impact that the show, the episodes, the guests, the content have had on their life. Who's telling a story for us today?
Game Changing Podcast. 5 stars. I've been listening to this show for over a year and went back and listened to nearly every episode several times. I share the show regularly with our texts. I feel like I've read this one before.
I feel like you did too.
You feel like that? Did I read this one recently? Well, let's read it anyway.
What was the name?
Anthony Taylor 15. But you know what? Let's finish it and we'll just throw another one on there. Why not? I share this episode regularly with our techs and salesmen, and it has prompted much better trainings. Can't recommend Waste No Day enough. Thanks, Brian and Nate. Anthony Taylor 15.
Yeah.
September 29th, 2024. Now we're going to move on to September 30th, 2024. Bangers upon bangers. 5 stars. I don't suppose he means like hot dogs in England, right? Bangers and mash or sausages or whatever they are.
I mean, it could be. We haven't had a lot of London listeners, to my knowledge. We've had some London guests. We had some British
Joey
guests.
Abedini, Steve Sims.
Steve Sims. Yep.
Every week I think to myself, there is no way Brian and Nate could come up with quality content after last week's episode. And boom, they do it again. Every episode covers relatable stuff that any technician, installer, sales rep, etc. can easily apply as soon as you're done listening. Thanks, guys, for improving my and my company's customer experience through what you do. P. Vinson 24.
Man, that's an awesome review. I love that.
Bro, I kind of feel like that sometimes. Not that I feel like the episodes are so high quality. I just feel like, like I'm walking upstairs and like, dude, how are we going to, like, what? Where are we going to, where are we going today? We got to, especially if we had a real good episode last week. It's like, we're not going to top that.
Well, fortunately, we have a bit of a episode roulette at some point, so never quite sure which episode is going to go next.
That's for sure. We sit down and face each other on the show and don't know what episode's coming up right now sometimes. Like, what are we doing?
True story. Yes.
But not tonight, buddy. Tonight is Lieutenant Colonel Scott Mann, and I am pumped because I've spent a significant amount of time virtually with him in these training courses that I'm on. I'll touch on them with Scott, but it's been very impactful for me personally, and I hope as impactful for our leadership team, Kyle and Daryl at our shop. But it's been really eye-opening journey. It's so weird to go through this thing, and we're training in a leadership training course through a book, chapter by chapter, with the author of the book on these Zoom calls. There's not that many people on it. And so you're like called on like every other training, and, just ask, share your experience with this, tell us a story of this, that kind of thing. And it's like it's been a real learning experience for me. I'm very, very glad that we partook in this thing.
That's great to hear. And it's great to hear that the shows continue to make an impact for you out there in listener land. And for those who have taken the time to leave a review and tell your story, we appreciate that. And we love hearing more of your stories. So please continue to do that. Right now, though, it's time for us to allow somebody else to tell their story as we put Lieutenant Colonel Scott Mann in your passenger seat. Our guest today is Lieutenant Colonel Scott Mann. For years, he worked in a low-trust, high-stakes environment where nobody was coming to save him, his men, or the exhausted majority of Afghans that they served. There, he learned that the best way to get big stuff done and bridge vast divisions is to meet people where they are, not where you want them to be. He calls this approach rooftop leadership. Wherever you live, work, or play, in real estate, in corporate sales, in HR, for a community volunteer group, in a nonprofit, in politics, the hardest thing to find these days is authentic connection with other people. The social trends and fraying of civil society after more than 2 years of prolonged isolation from COVID, mass technology, organizational strain, and blinking red stress levels on our emotional dashboards have taken a toll that those of us in our own exhausted majority are only beginning to understand and appreciate. With inspiring stories about his experiences in the military and candid reflections on civilian life, Scott Mann connects readers to a more ancient, primal aspect of their nature, rendered dormant by the modern world. His book, Nobody is Coming to Save You, shows readers how to navigate the churn that's dividing us and learn to make new and deeper connections to ourselves, to each other, and to the natural world around us. We are honored not only by the fact that he chose to come on the show with us, we are thankful for his service, and we're grateful for the opportunity to spend some time together. Welcome here, Lieutenant Colonel.
Hey, thanks for having me, Nate.
It's great to see you again, Scott. Scott and I are I'm in a coaching series that he does. Is it the Elevate course?
Yeah, it's the Elevate course. The Kellys run it, and I guess my course is within that. The Get Big Stuff Done leadership course.
Yeah. Thank you, because we don't swear on here, but it's actually Get Big S word done. And I don't want Nate to pull his mic and get all offended if I say the S word, but it's a leadership course. And I've taken lots and lots and lots of leadership training over the last probably 12 to 15 years. Even before I was in leadership, I got some kind of kick out of any kind of leadership training that I could get a hold of. Probably not coming from an environment where there was a strong male around and didn't know my dad. And it was just me and my twin and my mom in an apartment in Detroit. And there was right? There was no leadership really for us.
Yeah.
And when I got into my 20s and I got around mentors and leadership training, I was just like obsessed with it. I was like, what is this? This is amazing, And I've been through a ton of it. And I'll say for this Elevate course, he said to Kelly's, it's Josh and Laura Kelly, good friends of mine and Nate's, good friends of the show, through Clover, Grow with Clover. We should throw the website out, Nate, if you want to pull that up. It's just growwithclover.com.
Sure.
Yep, go ahead and find that, buddy. Or just shoot him Josh Kelly's email. What do we care? It's a leadership course that's 6 months, right?
Yeah, it is.
6 months, every other week. And then once a month, a one-on-one call with either Scott and the leader or Scott and the leadership team, whoever's on this group. And the course by itself in these group meetings is phenomenal because it's training with Scott and how he did some of the things you're going to hear about tonight. But also these one-on-one calls, it's like the two managers that joined me on our leadership team, neither of them have been in a leadership position until they got into leadership on this team, right? So they're brand new at it. And my humble opinion is that no such thing as a born leader. Like there's probably a scale where like you can be born a little bit higher on the scale than some other people. But I don't think there's a naturally born great leader because there are so many skills that you have to develop to be a great leader. Like you can't just be born a great basketball player. You can be tall, you can jump high, you can be fast, but you have to learn how to dribble, right? Somebody's got to teach you how to bounce that ball. And what I've seen in the three of us, and really I thought I was enrolling Daryl and Kyle in this course, but I've seen Scott able to take us from where we're at in terms of our leadership to much closer to where we want to be and even help us find where we want to be. So like for me in particular, probably too assertive sometimes, like overly aggressive in my leadership, and needed not necessarily to back that down, but to deliver it in a cooler, more nurturing way, right? And then one of the leaders on our team, almost an inability to be overly aggressive and overly assertive. And I've seen Scott helping him assert himself more. And one of them tends to bottle, and then explode. And Scott has him doing exercises to get better at just tweaking that nozzle. So it's always being let out. There's no bottling, there's no pressure, there's no explosion. I mean, this guy will live longer because of this leader. Like, I have no question about it. So can't harp on it enough. Grab the book. I know we're just starting and you have no reason to believe me yet, but you're about to. Get a copy of the book. Nobody's coming to save you. Getting Big S done. Get at Clover. And you're doing this course again, aren't you guys?
Yeah.
Yeah, get at Clover. Did you get that website, buddy?
Yes, it is growwithclover.com.
Growwithclover.com. Get a hold of Josh and Laura Kelly. They've been on the show. They're coming back on the show soon. And get enrolled in this course if you're a leader. If you have a leadership team, I'd say get the whole team on the course. It's a phenomenal course, and I'm hoping you guys keep it going for a long time. So I say all that to say thanks for coming on the show, buddy.
Yeah, man. Thank you. And thank you for that. That means a lot. I've known Josh and Laura a while too, and I'm big fans of them and the trust that they put in me, to come inside that circle like that and teach has been amazing. Like, it means a lot.
Yeah, he had a lot of great things to say about you because we were going in another direction for some leadership training right when he was starting this. And we didn't know about it. I had never heard about it. And he was like, whoa, what are you doing? Bro, you got to come check this thing out. So I'm glad we're here.
Yeah, man. Me too. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it is our pleasure. And your formal title is Lieutenant Colonel Scott Mann, retired, although you've graciously allowed us to refer to you as Scott throughout the program. And you are an author, a playwright, and so much more. We're very excited to dig into this. Obviously, part of the book, what Brian just mentioned there, the top, nobody's coming to save you, and the concepts that lie within it. And so to give our listeners some context about who you are, maybe they've read the book, maybe they haven't, but if you could kind of give us a couple minutes on your bio and your journey and like where life has brought you to the place that you're now actually instructing leadership classes, because it wasn't always so easy. And you have a very big story yourself. So tip that off for us.
Yeah, thank you. I think for me, it was being a runt as a kid, pretty bullied. And I grew up in a little logging town in Arkansas, and we didn't even have a stoplight. It was a small town. And when I was 14, I met a Green Beret, a U.S. Army Green Beret. His name was Mark. And the guy just took the time to sit down with me. Honestly, that was that, we all have these pivotal moments, I guess, in different stories. And, mine was the Green Beret actually sat down and talked to me. And when he did, he explained to me who he was and what he did, because I was just fascinated with it, the way the guy looked, the way he carried himself. And he started telling me how Green Berets were way different than Navy SEALs, how Navy SEALs really have way better hair than we do, how, Navy SEALs are great at putting on a target and they take the target down, and they usually do it very quickly. They operate on the missions usually by themselves, on target, off target. Same with Delta, same with the Rangers. But what Mark explained to me was, Green Berets are different. They work by, with, and through indigenous people. So they're elite, they're commandos, they parachute in below the noise. But what they do is connect with tribal elders or partner nation commandos, and they build relationships. And then over time, those relationships solidify and they mobilize those relationships into guerrilla fighters or partners in combat. So if you've ever seen the movie 12 Strong, they go in with 12 and they come out with 1,200. And that's been that way. Really, Mark explained to me since World War II, there have been these groups. So they were originally called the OSS, the Office of Strategic Services, and they were mostly lawyers and school teachers in World War II. And they would jump in small 3-man teams called Jedburghs, and they literally stayed behind lines, Nate, the entire war. They jumped into Belgium and France, and they stayed the entire war. They spoke the language. They trained the partisans how to fight, and then they advised them as they fought. And to me, man, that was it. At 14, I knew that's what I wanted to do. There was so much about that. The little guy standing up against the big guy, everything about it just was me, and it became my obsession. And so over a period of years, I eventually went in the Army. You had to wait like 5 years before you could even try out. So I went to jump school and ranger school and air assault school. I think I failed every one of them like twice. I think I failed every school I went to twice at least. But
they didn't write Captain America off of your story, did they?
no,
It's very, very similar.
Far from it. But I did. I had a hard time because I was a small guy, and it just was really challenging for me physically. But eventually, I did make it through, got my beret, and then I spent about 18 years, in special forces, as they're officially called, in places like Colombia, Peru, before the war. And then once 9/11 hit, almost exclusively in Afghanistan, in and out of that country multiple times.
Yeah, and that's a fascinating thing. And I was listening to your book. I never knew that about the Green Berets, about that concept of working with indigenous people. And I have seen the movie 12 Strong, and like how difficult it is to even identify all the different variations of people, because it's not as simple as like good guys, bad guys. There's like warring factions among people of indigenous, types, and like some like each other, some hate each other, some like them but don't like those, and it's very complex. How did you even begin to like understand the dynamic of all these countries you went into, and which group you want to work with, which group hates another group and refuse to work with that, and all that mess? How do you deal with that?
That's a really good question, man. I mean, and I don't get that question much. And it's actually a critical part of that line of work. And here's why. Because typically the Green Berets that really love it and I think are relevant, they have this penchant for going local, and that's what they teach you in special forces. They actually, when they put you through the course, the final exercise is they drop you into a 5-county role-playing exercise. It's the largest role-playing exercise in the world. It's called Pineland. 5 counties in rural North Carolina, and everybody in those counties are part of the role-playing game. And so you are technically behind lines, and you get graded, evaluated on your ability to make connections, to build rapport. And here's the thing, man, like if you go into Afghanistan, for example, I think there's something like 5 ethnicities and about 72 tribes and probably 250 sub-tribes. And if you're going to operate locally in southern Afghanistan, you have to know those tribal dynamics. You have to know how water works. You have to know grazing practices, farming shortfalls, all that stuff, because that's the stuff people are killing each other over. The same way people are killing each other and fighting here. It's all local stuff. And you have to have an appreciation for it. And honestly, Brian, the stuff that I teach, man, the stuff that's in that book, it really came from the reality that you had to go into these trust depleted places and you had to make a connection, and you really had to have an appreciation for what's happening at a local level. And the only way to do that is building relationships, and that at the end of the day is really what I fell in love with. And what I figured out at some point is, wow, that's really not unique to me. That's not unique to Green Berets. That's a reality everywhere. And it just so happens that if we get it wrong, we get killed. And so we take it very seriously, and we've built a skill and a craft around it. And that's what I'm trying to bring into the country today, because we're so divided and so scuffed up here now that it looks a lot more like Afghanistan than America.
Yeah, a painful reality for sure. And I can't even imagine all the different cultural nuances that you would have to learn. I mean, taking India, for example, you don't use your left hand for anything because the left hand is used, for unmentionable things and that type of stuff, but down to like tribal things where, certain interactions or certain ways of doing things could be offensive or non-offensive to others, and all that. Just such a fascinating thing. And thank you very much for your service, of course, and all the people who have served with you over the years. What an amazing ability and act of patriotism and servanthood to go in and do that, because according to your book and many of these stories, you are often working off grid without support, and your book is literally titled "Nobody is Coming to Save You," because you are so far behind enemy lines that if anything goes south, you're on your own. So talk to us about the title of that book and really the emphasis behind. Why did you choose that, and what is the overarching message that you're trying to deliver?
Yeah, you nailed it. I mean, that's kind of the idea behind special forces, is that they can be dropped into places where there's just no presence. And for example, the guys on our team you have engineers, you have weapons guys, you have medics, and you have communications guys. And then you have a couple of officers and senior NCOs. And you have a 12-person team. That's it. That's what you've got. But for example, the medics are so good. They're basically physician's assistants. They can do an appendectomy on the battlefield. They can pull teeth. They can issue pharmaceuticals. They can do veterinary care, And the reason is because you got to do all those things. You don't have a higher level of care if you're 250 miles from Kandahar and you get in a gunfight and you take casualties. Like higher level of care, yeah, but everything, you're going to have to manage all the trauma within your team. And that's just one example. So there is this mentality that nobody's coming, but it's not like a morbid kind of thing. And the NCOs, the sergeants that I always worked with, they would say that with glee. They loved the fact that they were on their own and that they had that autonomy and that ability. But guess what? The real reason that we were able to do it was because of the relationships we built with locals. We had such strong social capital with the people in these communities that if something happened, you had relationships that these people were going to help you. You weren't on your own, so to speak. So, but the title just came because I heard that over and over again, and it became just kind of a way of thinking about the world. And it seems to me in the United States that a lot of folks are waiting for somebody to come and save them. They're waiting for this politician or, this diplomat or this policymaker to save them. And it's just not the way the world works. It's not. And America's never really worked that way. And I think that we've got to get out of this mentality that somebody's coming, because nobody's coming. When it comes to leading your family and your community, man, it's just us, and I think that's a good thing. But until we kind of get that through our heads and then start building our human connection skills out of that, we're going to keep waiting for somebody else. And that's a dangerous place to be these days.
Yeah. And I think there's several levels. That's like a spectrum, right? So I just gave a leadership talk the other day about avoiding victimhood. We went through, Covey's first chapter of like the circle of influence and everything that he talks about there about like not allowing the outside to press in and your circle of concern to press in, instead press out and all that. And it's, just written in 1989 and still mind blowing today.
Oh, it's timeless.
Right. So like there's the there's the victimhood mentality. And then you can get to kind of neutral, which is like, all right, I'm not a victim, but maybe I'm not necessarily a rescuer either. You're saying that the Green Berets almost pride themselves on being like, you know what, nobody's coming to save me and I'm okay with that. Was that a mentality that was taught to you, driven into you? Were you born with that, grew up with that, environmental push, something like that? How did you get to that place? Is that a place that all of us can get to? Or is there, just some people are born with that, like, hey, I'm good, drop me off in the middle of the woods and I'm going to have a great time?
I don't think I was born with it. I agree with what Brian says. I think that so much of that is developed. I think within each of us, I believe we are gifted an innate primal ability to navigate through hard times. It's within us. It's in our body. It's cellular memory. It's a couple 100,000 years old. But what's happened is that we've buried it. We've buried it, but all the transactional stuff in the world, what I call the churn, all of the division and the distraction and the disengagement and putting our heads down and, in these dopamine dispensers, man, and just staying in our phones all the time. So I think we've lost those innate drivers that allow us to be independent, that allow us to thrive when times are hard. We've kind of lost that, and it's we still have it, but it's just invisible to us. And what I found that Special Forces did for me was they surrounded me with these amazing sergeants and junior officers who had lived this life and who had built this process, again, all the way back to World War II, man. And so there's a very deep culture of nobody's coming, of go local or go home, build rapport or die. And so I was gifted that and able to just immerse in that and stand on the shoulders of these amazing humans who, when most people would reach for their pistol, these guys reach across with a handshake somehow. Now you don't want to cross them. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I tell people that, and it's in the book, the modern day Green Beret is a combination of John Wick, Lawrence of Arabia, and the Verizon guy. But the John Wick is the baseline, and they can go 0 to 100 in a heartbeat, but They don't lead with it.
Yeah.
They don't lead with coercion. And that was what to me was always fascinating about these guys, was how they could go into the darkest places on earth and still build rapport. And I just thought, man, that is a real skill.
You use the word coercion often in the book, in the training series that I'm in with you. Can you define, because I hear coercion, I immediately get taken mentally to a courtroom, right? Objection, coercion. Can you explain to us what you mean when you say coercion?
I mean, my Arkansas public education working definition of coercion is basically forcing someone to do something they don't really want to do. And it could be physical force. It could be pressure from the power that you hold at work. It could just be intimidating somebody, but it's generally moving someone to action where they take action, not because they choose to, but because they have to, or they feel like they have to. And what I saw in special forces was we would go into these places and, the whole rooftop leadership that I talk about, where you get people to go up on a rooftop, tribes, and fight back against the Taliban, to go up on their rooftops. It wouldn't start that way. It would take weeks, if not months, of building one relationship at a time. And then in the evenings, the attacks would come and the team would run up on the roof and they would gun it up for the night. Then they would hobble back down the ladders. And the next day they're out engaging, drinking tea, helping with crops. And then once again, back up the roof at night. And over time, the social capital, the tangible and intangible linkages between the Green Berets and these villagers got so strong that then there'd be one villager up on the roof firing back. And then the next night, 3 more muzzle flashes, and then 10, and then 15. And eventually the entire collective made an autonomous choice to stand up for themselves. And watching that in action for me was everything, because that's when I saw, oh, wow, when someone takes action because they choose to do it and out of reciprocity for the other person, they feel a reciprocal need to stand up for them. Dude, that's the highest form of loyalty. It's the highest form. It's the highest ROI on leadership. And I just became obsessed with trying to figure out how you do that. Because it's not unique to SF or Afghanistan. That is something that's available to every one of us. That's a biological reality. It's just we've covered it up and we don't train on it.
It's such a absolutely mandatory skill to learn, especially in any kind of leadership position, because if you find yourself in a leadership position where every goal you need to accomplish requires the coercion of your people, it requires you to put quote unquote disciplinary systems in place where it's do this or else, you're failing as a leader before you even started, for one. And it's those, and I've been there where I thought this was how you lead, and what I ended up with was a broken team full of broken people and a significant amount of turnover. And then you figure out, hopefully sooner than later, that it's not the way to do it. The way to do it is, as our buddy Tommy Mello talks about all the time, having a dream big enough where all your people's dreams fit inside it.
Yeah.
And now everybody's pushing toward the same goals. Now there's always the guy that just can't show up on time and needs to be a little bit of force implemented there, most likely. Although not always, but sometimes. So coercion isn't something that can't be in an, you're not saying it can't be in an organization for sure, but it's never the go-to, or should never be the go-to.
100%, man. I mean, again, I go back to those 3 avatars. I think those fit in the service industry. There's got to be John Wick at the baseline. John Wick. But if you think about John Wick as an avatar, like if you just unpack that character, he's not a character that just prays and sprays when he applies force, right? He's very surgical. He avoids anything other than his target, right? That's all he focuses on. And there's no broad application of coercion. It's only on the thing right in front of him that's trying to do him harm. That's a very important way to think about coercion. I call it surgical coercion. Life will require of us at times to be coercive. That's just the way the world is. But that's your baseline. Like you said, Brian, I don't believe that's what you lead with, particularly in an environment where, again, like this time of churn where everybody's already in an emotionally aroused state of fear or anger. They're one step away from, a complete breakdown in public or in the office. And so, if you lead with coercion, man, you're just going to be in the churn all the time. Like, you're not going to get anything done, and you're going to create all these social insurgents around you that are just going to tube your goals when you're not looking. Or just at best, they're going to passively, they're not going to stick their jugular out for you for sure. And then, the Lawrence of Arabia, this is a guy that in 1917 was a former geologist, walked into modern day Syria and mobilized the entire Bedou tribe to overthrow the Ottoman Turks who were fighting alongside the Germans. One guy uses relationships to tell a story about how the tribes could take the city of Aqaba from the desert. He used storytelling to mobilize these folks and defeated the Ottoman Empire. I mean, you talk about an ROI. That's, one guy who just was really good at what I call the Lawrencian skills, man, those human engagement skills. And then the Verizon guy, it's like what y'all are doing, is building networks, building connections that bridge across the miles and, create this just like catalyst horsepower. All three of those things we need as leaders. We need to be able to do all of them. And every time the cocktail will look different. Like you said, if somebody is traditionally late to work, yeah, there's going to be a need for surgical coercion. But to what degree? And how much do you need to land on the guy? I mean, if you already are the boss, do you have to can you wear your power lightly and still enforce the standard and do what you got to do? I think you can. In fact, Professor James Clausen says that leadership's the management of energy, yours and those around you. You watch a good UFC fighter, they're not spending a ton of energy when they don't have to, and I think the same is true with coercion. It's just power analysis. How much do I need to spend to just achieve the goal here? So for me, it's about, that's when when you and I had that conversation that time in the mastermind, Brian, and I was talking about, it's not that you don't assert those things you're saying when they need to be done. It's just what level of energy do you put yourself at so that you don't, wear yourself down every time that happens.
Yeah. And I'm cool to talk about it. I forget the words that I used, but it was the thing that probably grinds my gears the most in leadership, the thing that can make me snap on somebody more than likely inappropriately or with overdue anger or aggression, is a lack of urgency. It's a non-urgent person in general who's just kind of like, maybe it'll get done, maybe it won't. And I'm going 100 miles an hour at all times, trying to hit every goal I have and every goal that the team around me has. So I always, in the moment, I feel someone who's just non-urgent is an anchor on our ship.
Yep.
And Scott's helping me through that part of kind of working back into myself. Where does this come from? Why am I like this? Why is this such a big deal to me? How can I get everybody rowing in the same direction without hitting somebody with my oar?
Yep. And to be clear, the kind of stuff, and this was exactly what we would face in Afghanistan, for example. It wouldn't be uncommon. You would have guys on the team that their pet peeve was, someone who would talk crap about America, right? Or who would get up in your face, and you go into some of these villages, that's a foregone conclusion that's going to happen. You know that's going to happen. But if you go high order on that individual, one, it's about 100 to 12, in the odds of it. But two, you're never going to achieve what you want to get done. You need to co-opt that person. You need to get that person moving in a direction that you need him to move. And so we would spend a lot of time on understanding what I call the human operating system, right? It's that if the churn is the enemy, the division and the disconnection between humans, the human operating system is kind of the antibody to the churn. It is that old part of ourselves. It's the primal part of who we are. And the more you can understand that, the more you can understand how we're wired, understand that, we're pretty much well-dressed Neanderthals in terms of how we navigate the world. We still are very, very ancient in how we think and operate, particularly when we're angry or afraid. Man, you got a competitive edge. You do. You show up differently and you can own a room much more effectively. And that's the part. It doesn't mean that you don't enforce that particular, that's a dadgum good standard. It's just the question is, how do you do it and still maintain your agency and your energy?
Yeah. And Brian's not even that well dressed, which makes it all the more impressive. But Scott, a minute ago, you mentioned something. You mentioned the word you have to co-opt that person, and when I think of coercion, I definitely think of that being much more of a gun to the head, to be blunt, type of scenario. But cooperation or co-opt somebody is working together and collaborative. Those are the types of things, and our listener base is mainly geared towards the home services industry. People who have to work with something like. We can't walk in and say like, hey, gun to your head, Scott, we got to do this plumbing repair today. Which one do you want to use? That's not going to work. So what were some of the skill sets that you learned more on the cooperation side? Because, we're carrying wrenches, we're carrying gauges, we're carrying wires around. We're not carrying guns. And so we can't necessarily do strategic coercion. I mean, it's not going to usually end well for us. We're going to get a 1-star rating. So we have to do way more on the cooperation side of things. What were some of the skills that you learned dealing with very difficult people and cultures, people who were immediately adversarial to you, like just by the nature of who you are, what you're wearing, why you're in their country, all these things? What were some of the skills that you learned to really build that trust and those bridges towards an adversarial client, if you will, and overcome so many of the things that you could actually cooperate well together?
Yeah. So to be clear, let me back up just a second here, because when I talked about those 3 avatars and the John Wick avatar of surgical coercion, to be clear, even in places where you can carry a gun, when we were doing that kind of work, if that was what you led with, you were going to have a very short career in special forces. Just to be really clear. Yeah. Like that. So even in places where you can, technically do that, it doesn't work. Like, this is what I say is humans are meaning-seeking, emotional, social storytellers who struggle. We are social. We are born to be social. It's our superpower. So the more you can understand that we have an innate desire to connect with other humans, that's just how we're wired. The more you can understand that, the more you can do it. So to your point about the skills, that some of the things that I found that are really, really important is one is learning is how to read emotional temperature in a room, right? If you can't gauge emotional temperature in yourself, in the other party, in your kids, and your spouse, then the odds are you're going to get sucked into that emotional temperature churn, just like someone trying to rescue a drowning person. Mm-hmm. You'll get sucked right into it. So being able to read that and being able to assess that, and then what I tell people, particularly in the services industry, your superpower is being able to get the other party ready to listen to what you have to say.
Yeah.
That's the key. And the way you do it, man, honestly, is really old school, focusing on trying to see the pictures in the head of that person. What are their goals? What are their pain? What are their goals? What are their pain? Like, I want to see the pictures in their head, whether that's a client, whether that's one of my teammates, whether that's my kid. Because nowadays in these transactional times that we live in, Nate, most people aren't even trying to do that. They're just trying to get their goals met. They could care less about what the pictures are in the head of the other party. And people smell that on you a mile away, man. You can smell it on somebody when they're that transactional, or they're that caught up in their phone, or they're that caught up in their timeline. Most leaders today are not even really engaging their people or seeing the pictures in their heads. They're just pushing them, And I think it comes down to just being able to see the pictures in the head of the person across from you, what their goals are and what their pain is, and then really getting a sense of that, listening to the degree that you can articulate that back to them. Chris Voss talks about this in Never Split the Difference. Being able to ask calibrated questions until you're pretty clear on what the other party's pain is, framing that out to them and getting them to say, yeah, that's right. And then they're ready to listen. It really is, man. It's more questionology than it is talking. It's being able to listen like your life depends on it.
And constantly seeking alignment, right? So you have objectives. The person on the other side of the table or the other side of the line has objectives. And not all of your objectives are necessarily going to line up, but some of them will. And the more that you can identify aligned objectives, the farther you can go together and cooperate together.
This is actually where the storytelling comes in. I agree with you on that. First of all, I mean, humans are, the way we navigate the world is we're trying to get our goals met. You know what I mean? Like, we're meaning-seeking, meaning-assigning creatures. So we're constantly trying to get our goals met. do you even know what the goals of the other party are?
Hmm.
You know, I would say if you don't, you're pretty irrelevant in that engagement. If the only thing you're cognizant of are your goals, then you are at a serious disadvantage in that engagement. And coercion is probably your only option. Now, because how can you even think about alignment if you don't know what their goals are? You know,
you can't. I mean, all you are pursuing at that point is your own objectives.
That's right. And so to bring it back, I think that's where storytelling can be such a powerful tool. I call it narrative competence, right? The use of storytelling in real time to meet your goals. But in these cases, it's not necessarily the stories you're telling, it's the stories you're asking to hear from the other party. You know, questions that start with what and how, and just let the client tell you a story. Let the prospect tell you their story. Let the team member that has had a really, really rough past 3 days, let them tell you the story, you know. And that's what we would do in special forces. Arguably might take a little longer than just get to the point, but you're bringing emotional temperature down. You're accelerating trust as you do it. You're getting the goods on the pictures in their heads, and you're really positioning yourself, like even just asking thoughtful questions that let them respond in narrative. You're creating reciprocity. I've seen and I've done situations where 95% of the engagement with a client or a prospect was me asking open-ended questions, and like 5%, you know, hey, would it be okay if I did this, or I said this, or I told you this? Like almost all of it was questions about them and what they value and what their pain is, and what they think about things. And I think in this time of churn, man, like if I were going to teach one skill and I only could teach one, it would probably be questionology, asking questions that evoke stories.
And I appreciate you bringing that up, Scott. It's a perfect segue because so much of your story, if you will, is about story and how story has really allowed you to experience freedom and a sense of relief, if you will, or this new you, a different version of you, and you've been able to escape or heal from a lot of different injuries, mostly mental and emotional. I'm thinking. And in fact, you know, you wrote the book. You had never written a book before. You wrote a play. You had never written a play before. A great success in both of those. And so story has been a big part of this journey for you. And yet, you know, when I think of storytelling, it's me telling a story. But then I hear you say questionology, and it sounds more like you're trying to draw out a story from somebody else. So talk to us about both sides of that coin. You know, in our line of work, is it only questionology, or do we also have some responsibility when it comes to the story? How do you position when you talk to leaders, when you talk to people in the home services industry, if you will, where storytelling plays a part on both sides of that equation?
Yeah, great question. So the first thing to be clear is the way that I arrived at this was it started off standing in a closet holding a pistol, you
Oh,
know,
wow.
with no intention of coming out. And that's what transition from the military had led me to. It got really dark, really fast, really bad. And it almost took me out of this world. And were it not for, you know, a mentor that stepped into my life, who was a civilian, by the way, wasn't even military, and helped me develop storytelling. This was a professional storyteller, former NFL athlete, developed storytelling as a modality for healing. That's what started for me. It was a way to deal with my survivor's guilt, my moral injury, the PTS. And I had no design on anything other than just trying to stay alive at that point. But at some level, I started to make sense of things that didn't make any sense. You know, friends that had left this world doing what I asked them to do, you know, and things that I just could not get over. All of a sudden now we're starting to come into alignment, as you talked about, in a way that I never thought they would. And that felt pretty good to me.
Are you able to explain what that means by, like, for people who might be and very likely listening to the show who are struggling with that kind of alignment, because the skilled trades are heavy with veterans, thankfully?
Yeah.
Can you explain what you mean by how those things, especially people that you knew and probably cared for, passing, doing things you told them to do, how you can bring that to alignment in a world now where you're not fighting on rooftops and things like that anymore, but you're sitting at your kid's choir practice. And I mean, it's just such a different world.
Yeah. I mean, you go from, this high performing individual who's, sticking and moving and on an adrenaline rush all the time to all of a sudden you're it's like changing planets. It really is. It's like changing planets. It's so extreme. And by the way, it's very tribal in the military. And then you come back to the world and it's not as tribal. You're more on your own. So it's super isolating. And you just have time to kind of sit in all of that and the stuff you didn't deal with because you just push it down and you push it down and you keep going. You got to get back in the fight. You don't want anybody to know anything except that you're ready to go. And then all of a sudden, the snakes in the head start squirming, man. And that's what happened with me. And I had lost my purpose. I'd lost my identity. And frankly, had lost just a sense of who I was, and I was starting to see myself as irrelevant. And it really would be just better if I wasn't around. And I never thought like that. It was over a long period of time that started to happen to me. But when it did, it was a fast spiral. In the storytelling, what that did for me and what I've since learned about it, because I work a lot now in this space with Gold Star families and war fighters and first responders with severe PTS and trauma, is that what happens is, the brain has a mandate to make sense of the world. That's what the brain's mandate is. And storytelling for 70,000 years has been a sense-making tool. Every society on the planet uses storytelling as a way to bring warriors home. It always has. They always have. We're about the only country on the planet that doesn't. What we do, you hear the term quiet professionals, right? You come home, you button that stuff up, and you go to the world and you do what you're supposed to do as a civilian. You don't talk about it. You don't talk about it to your family. And, that's a time bomb, right? But stories metabolize the trauma and the tension in the body, and they give you a way to express it and connect with other humans. And as you do that, what's happening is the brain is making sense of a white hot trauma loop, and it's starting to restore isolated events into bigger memories. And so there's a whole, biological, just massive engine at work here. And I didn't know any of that at the time, but what I knew was that as I kept working through my story and I shared it with other folks, other veterans about my suicidal ideations and my struggles, man, that all of a sudden they would lock in and I would get a look and they were like, yeah, dude, I was in that closet, or I'm kind of there now. And that's when it really started. I started calling it the generosity of scars, right? The ability to repurpose our struggles in the service of other people. And Brian, I mean, to be candid, like this isn't reserved for military. When I heard you, the first time I met you was when we were on that call and you immediately went into your story about your growing up, what you went through as a kid, getting off narcotics, like all of that stuff, the in and out of trouble. And immediately, man, I locked into that. I've been in recovery for 24 years. Like it's those stories, the pivotal moments of our struggle and how we overcame them, man, they are essential to figuring out our place in this world. I just believe that. So, I know, Nate, there's more to answer on the question of like how to use this in the day to day, but I feel like to answer the question of how it saved my life and how it brought me into what I teach now and what I know about it, it was from the darkest period of my life, the most embarrassing, humiliating scar I'd ever experienced that ended up being repurposed eventually into a play that was produced by Gary Sinise. Like no clue that would ever happen. And I'm not saying that's what'll happen every time you go through this process. But what I am saying is that what's on the other side of the darkest stuff you're in right now is exactly what somebody needs to hear somewhere else. And I believe that with all my heart.
That is my favorite part of the book. Like, you don't know it yet, but we do an intro before we bring the guest on when we quote unquote, while you're waiting in the lobby, so to speak, even though this is all virtual, but we do a quote to open the show. And the quote that we used today was a quote from your book where you said, be generous with your scars. And my favorite thing in that book is the real focus on the fact that your story, not yours, Scott Mann, not yours, Nate Minnick, not Brian Burton, but the listener, the tech in the driver's seat of the service truck that we're playing in right now. Your story is the stuff of legend to someone out there, and not one person, but tons and tons of people, because you have a similar background, and you've gone through similar things that someone else is going through now. And you've already overcome way more than you realize. But there's somebody out there who's where you were 6 months or 6 years ago and could really use hearing your story.
Yep.
And you talk about the three things that typically keep people from either thinking they have a story or thinking that their story is important. And I have them on one of my whiteboards at the shop right now, because they were such a big deal when you trained the three of us on it, that I went to my team and took it to them and some other teams that I coach. Would you mind sharing those three things with the person who's listening to this right now thinking, that's great that Scott overcame this and Brian overcame that, but my story is very boring. There's not a whole lot to it.
Yeah, the three, and I've trained thousands of people on their stories across all walks of life. And I've never in all those times gone, oh, you're right, man. You don't have a story. Sorry. Like,
and then you met Nate Minnick.
Yeah, I guarantee it, because it's a lived experience. That's why. And what's personal is universal. That's the reality. That's what Dr. Carl Rogers says, is what's personal is universal. But what I typically hear, three things is, one is I don't have a story. Two is my story is not as good as his. And three is nobody wants to hear my story. Right. And all of those, like the first one, I definitely want to take on, because the fact of the matter is, the brain, according to Dr. Ivan Tyrrell, the brain is a metaphorical pattern matching organ. In other words, the brain tells itself a story for every moment you experience in your life. The brain doesn't use data. It doesn't use PowerPoint. It doesn't use facts. The brain tells itself a story about what's happening in the moment. That's the only way it can make sense of things. So in effect, you're right. You don't have a story. You have about 50 million stories. And the reality is, you'll continue to have those stories for as long as you're taking breath. It's just that we're kind of conditioned not to do it, But those other two are also will take you out. Comparing yourself to other stories, not a good idea, because, again, if it's personal to you, it has universal value. And then the fact that nobody wants to hear your story. Let me tell you something, even on your service calls, when you're engaging in conversation, when you are talking to a person on the team that's either going through it or new on the team, or you're talking to one of your kids, stories are how people make sense of the world, man. All they do is get inundated by leaders nowadays who talk about 3 ways to be great like me, right? It's watchable. The storyteller is the one that's going to get people to pause every time, and they're hungry for it. You got to work at it. It can't be like this one time at band camp or, no kidding, there I was. Like, that's not really storytelling in this sense. The stories are told in the service of the audience. Stories that you tell in the service of the person across from you. Even if you're the subject, it's about them. It's not about you, and what they can learn from it.
And we just, you tell your story about being in that closet, and I've never been in that closet, but I've been in some pretty dark places. And I don't think of myself in the closet with the 45, but I think about myself with a handful of pills that I think might do the job, or a bottle, or putting myself in way overly dangerous circumstances in my late teens and early 20s. And just think there was probably an aspect of just let it happen already to it. But wherever you're at, or wherever you've been, you just kind of latch on to pieces of the story as you're saying them, and then bring them home internally and relate to the parts you can relate to. It's like you say, you telling a story isn't making me think 100% about you. It's probably making me think 30% about you and 70% about my narcissistic self over here.
It's actually it's not. What it is what stories are actually designed for, right? So if I staggered into the campfire 20,000 years ago and I'm all bloodied up and I'm like, all right, let me tell you guys why saber-toothed tigers make crappy pets. Right? Everybody around the fire would lean in and listen as if their lives depended on it. Why? Because they did, right? See, my lived experience in that moment with the saber-toothed tiger You listen to it, and what that's called is autobiographical listening. You are listening to my lived experience and processing your own life in the safety of my story. That's why there's so much generosity in it, because I'm literally taking the thing that scuffed me up and I'm sharing it with you. And it's so impactful. And it's, if you do it authentically, you feel like you were the one that got scuffed up by the saber-toothed tiger. Like you're literally processing your own life. So when you said, Brian, that when I talked about the closet, you didn't necessarily picture the closet, but you pictured a handful of pills. That is autobiographical listening. That is you processing your life in the safety of my story. And it's the most generous thing a leader, a parent, a business owner can ever do, because you're taking the very scars that scuffed you up and you're putting them out there in the service of someone else who needs to make sense of something desperately. And man, I've lost a lot of friends, who put pistols in their mouths. But I've seen a lot of guys who didn't, because of this very thing. And yes, that's a real extreme example, but back to Nate's point, the same thing can happen when you're talking about how you got into the service industry on a call, and you're just having a conversation, and maybe you share what led you to get into that, and it was actually some challenges in your life. And all of a sudden the prospect or the client goes, you know what, that happened to me. That same thing happened to me. And all of a sudden now you are in an engagement that is a dance. It is reciprocity. And the very thing that causes villagers to go up on that rooftop is now happening right there in that moment. Like that's what we're designed to do. And so that's why I'm always encouraging people to really get into the storytelling, because man, you never know where you'll be able to put it into play. And not only will it help people, save people, but also it just makes you better at your job and a better parent, because the brain is wired to make sense of the world through story. And we're always grateful when someone's generous with their stories, and they're for us.
Probably the primary thing we do on this show is communication training, sales training, trying to help. I mean, if I had a primary goal in life in terms of a technician running his or her calls day to day, it's to help a technician make as much money as possible in as little time away from the family and the hobbies and the spiritual life and the other parts of life as possible. So that's what we do with Waste No Day. And I always say your story sells. Stories sell 100%. And I was coaching a locksmith team this morning on presenting. They just want to become better communicators and presenters and get higher tickets and good guys, not looking to rip people off or anything. And I was asking them who has a great story that's just part of your, and this goes to everybody listening because so many think they don't have a story. But I said, I think it was like show of hands, who doesn't think they have a great story to share? And maybe the whole room's hands went up, save one or two people. And I randomly picked Kenny. Kenny said, I said, okay, well, here's the questions that I want answers to. All right. So here's how we'll figure it out. How did you get into being a locksmith? And what would you be doing if you weren't in locksmithing? Now, I'm a plumber, right? Until I came out of a truck. So my story would be, how did I get into plumbing? And what would I be doing if I wasn't plumbing? And the reason I like that part of the equation is whatever I would be doing if I wasn't plumbing is not as good as what I'm doing in plumbing, or I would be doing it, right? If I was going to make more money and have more fun and better relationships and love my job more, if there was another version of this that gave me all those things, that's what I'd be doing. So it's probably worse. So if we can think of those two things on the way into the call, I felt like there would be a sense of gratitude earned by thinking about what I could be doing that's worse. And then my story can help me connect with the client. Well, Kenny didn't really have one. Okay, so how did you get into locksmithing? And he said, well, I had to call a locksmith and he charged $600 for like 20 minutes. And I'm like, well, there must be money in locksmithing then. And I said, okay, well, that's a story, but why did you call a locksmith? And he said, well, actually my mom did, because our family's restaurant was broken into and they stole all these tablets and we had to replace all these tablets and it was expensive. I said, now you're storying, bro.
Yeah, that's right.
So you can go into a home and maybe your story isn't as dramatic as this of how you got into electrical or HVAC or garage doors or what have you. But Kenny learned this morning that he could go into a home and start by saying, just to let you know, I've been a locksmith for X number of years, and I got into it because my family restaurant was broken into, because we had a soft spot in that restaurant that we didn't know about. And what I'm here to do today, aside from fix this bedroom door lock, is help to make sure that there are no soft spots in your home. So, you know, when you're at work, your family is as safe as they can possibly be.
It's fantastic.
And you talk about a story that sells. I'm like, man, I wish I had that story when I was running calls. Like, you got one of the best stories I've ever heard, you know? So yeah. Those two questions for me, I'd love to hear your feedback, or if you have anything that we can add or tweak on that to kind of come up with the story of how you approach the client. Because I think just walking in like we do, hey, thanks for using Waste No Day Plumbing. It's great to meet you. Show me where the water heater is. We're missing some big stuff right there.
Yeah, look, man, I think that's really great coaching that you gave him. And, you know, there's a couple of prompts like that. You can, anything that kind of gets at the pivotal moment, or that something that might surprise the prospect, even the Waste No Day, you know, you could even take that and say, what does that mean to you? Like, what does that mean to you in your own life? Where would that most apply to your life? Can you tell me a time in your life where that really resonates with you? You know, and even if you don't use it, right, the attachment that you now get to Waste No Day is completely different as a member of that organization. That's something actually you could do inside your company. Is, you know, the next time you do a leadership retreat, or the next time you guys circle up, is, what does that phrase mean to you, man? What does that phrase mean to you from your life? And just go around the horn. And then all of a sudden, now you've redefined the organizational narrative. Everybody has a sense of each other. But the way that you coached that individual, I mean, that's it. That's as good as it gets right there. Because what people want to know, here's the thing. And again, I'll try to answer another angle on Nate's question about, you know, how you can use this in the day-to-day. So, you know, there is a fine line about when you tell a story and when you don't. You know, like, if somebody's basement's flooding and you're like, well, let me tell you first before I do this. Like, that's not, you know, probably the time. But the point is, what we really want is, we want people to get a sense of who we are. You know, that's, people choose you way before they choose your brand or your service or anything else. They choose the person standing in front of them. And so the way I kind of come at it is, most of the time in an initial engagement, it's not the stories you tell, it's the stories you ask to hear. Right. That's kind of how I typically come at it. Is I try to ask a couple of open-ended questions that get some narrative coming back my way. And then I would probably see that as my opportunity to tell them about my attachment to Waste No Day Plumbing and what we're all about. You know, would it be okay if I share with you this? You know, so I would just throw that on top of it. Is the default every time can be asking open-ended questions to the person in front of you that start with what and how, so that you can see the pictures in their head. That will almost never fail you. And it will set you up for the moment when you lay your story down that can just kind of seal the deal.
You know, I'm powering through chapter 8 right now for the second time of your book. And you said, I believe the quote was, if you want beautiful stories, ask beautiful questions. Was that the quote?
Mm-hmm.
Man, I had to stop right there. I'm literally sitting here getting the quote together and getting like the review ready that I read before the interview. And I'm listening to that part, and I heard, if you want beautiful stories, ask beautiful questions. It's like, it's 5:29 my time PM. So it's like go live time. Like, I'm like, Nate's texting me, you in here? I'm like, just wait. I want to get through this part. So it really intrigued me, because I'm like, I know you're about to go into it. Like I said, I had listened to the book the first time through, but it was like kind of that distracted, like I'm just trying to get through it. And this second time, I'm really savoring how good this book is. And again, chapter 7 on storytelling, I just went through it probably 3 times. Can you dive into that? And I know it's we're coming up on the end here, but a little bit, can you dive into what it means to ask beautiful questions to get beautiful stories?
Yeah, I have to give all props to one of my mentors, a guy named Warren Berger. He wrote the book of Beautiful Questions, and he calls himself a questionologist. And what Warren says, it is that if you want beautiful answers, if you want beautiful stories, you have to ask beautiful questions. And so, what I think that means are what I call thoughtful, open-ended questions that let the other party tell you a story. Thoughtful, open-ended questions that let the other party tell you a story. So thoughtful means if you're going to go into an engagement, put a little thought into the questions you're going to ask. Like, what do I want to know about this that will really engage and give this individual an opportunity to really show me the pictures in their head. I thought, if you heard what I said to Nate right out of the gate when he asked the question about kind of understanding that local dynamic, I thought that's a beautiful question, man. Like that, I've never really heard that question. So thoughtful, thinking about your questions ahead of time if you can. I would say in y'all's industry, you could even, and Berger suggests this, have a database of questions that technicians can ask when they are on calls that work really well. That really, like when you ask it, the other person goes, huh? Like that kind of question. If you experience that, come back, debrief on that, and keep that somewhere and share that across the formation with other technicians. Like that's a good thing because typically those will have a universal component to them. So thoughtful questions and then open-ended. They start with what and how. And I'm focused on trying to see the pictures in the head of the other party, goals and pain. In y'all's line of work, start with the pain. Open-ended questions that allow them to share their pain, because almost every time they're in pain, the goals will follow. You'll figure the goals out based on their pain. And I really want to see what that is. Again, I really want to see, and then let them just tell you the story and listen, and do kind of what you did, Brian, when you hear, well, I was locked out. Well, why were you locked out? Like, go a little deeper, like real discovery. With what y'all do, honestly, particularly the guys on the front lines, in that sense, the world is your oyster, man. The relationship is the asset in what you all do. The relationship is the asset. And just that approach right there with questionology, you will develop more relationships and more social capital by making 95% of your engagements questions than anything else you do. And I fully believe that. I teach that at Fort Bragg, and I swear by it here. If I'm wrong, next time I'm out y'all's way, I'll buy a steak. I really believe in it.
So good, Scott. And man, the conversation could just keep going for a long time. There's so much story. There's so much discovery to do here. It's been so good to have you on, and we would be remiss if we didn't give the opportunity to share a little bit about where people can get connected with you or anything that you're talking about. So obviously you have a book. I'm sure that's available at most vendors, but where's good places to get connected with you and your content?
Yeah, thanks, man. I really enjoyed being on with you guys. If you go to scottmann.com, 2 T's, 2 N's, all my body of work is there. I've recently opened up a platform on a community on School, SKOOL. It's called the Scott Mann Leadership Academy. But, I would love to folks to join me there. We do a lot of this kind of work there. It's free. And pretty soon I'm going to be opening up a storytellers community there as well for people that want to go deeper.
Great.
So, yeah, man, love to connect there.
So Scott, one final question as we wrap things up here. And I'm struggling through this one a little bit because the mantra of the book, the title of the book, the mantra of the Green Berets is this celebration of nobody's coming to save me. And I'm good with that because I'm good, right? Like I'm independent, I'm autonomous. Like I got this. I'm nobody's victim. I'm going to make my own. And so much of what you've talked about today is around collaboration and story and support, and don't isolate and don't find yourself in a bad place and all these types of things. And I'm juxtaposing these two concepts with each other, and I'm struggling to rectify the gap that seems between it because, from our listener standpoint and from, just being a man, it's like, yeah, nobody's coming for me. I'm fine. I'm going to go conquer the world. This is mine. And yet we also know that no man is an island, and this is how people die. Like, this is how people end up in very dark places. So as we kind of close out, give us some peace with understanding how those two things mesh together so that our listeners can go forward with a balance of both attitudes.
Yeah. So, it's definitely a play on words. Nobody is coming to save you, because if you look at the subtitle, it's a Green Beret's Guide to Getting Big Stuff Done. And when you read the book, you see, like, there is not one sentence in that book about being a tough guy, a commando, or anything else. Every single aspect of that book, the Green Beret's Guide, is human connection. That entire book is about human connection. And the reality is, the reason that Green Berets can survive with 12 people in a rough place is because they are better at human connection than just about anybody on the planet. So what I would say is, nobody wins alone. Nobody is going to overcome the stuff that life throws at you on your own. The only way that we've survived without fur, fangs, and claws for 250,000 years is our innate ability to connect with other humans. The problem is we've lost the skill, and that book is all about getting that skill back.
If you want to hear more of Scott just in this capacity, the Scott Mann podcast on YouTube is a great place to hear it. He gets on there and tells a lot of stories. I had a question about your podcast, and then we'll let you go. I love your studio setup, and I'm kind of looking at how I'm going to set this wall up that you see behind me and shoot some reels and stuff like that. The flag behind you, I don't know if anybody told you, but it's a little tattered. It's not exactly brand new. Is there a pretty cool story behind that flag?
So on Sean Ryan, if you've ever seen the guy Legend that's on there, he is the Afghan American Army NCO who was from Afghanistan, fled the country when the Taliban took over the first time, and then joined the army at a very young age, our army, went to Afghanistan multiple times, and then when it got out, and then when was injured, Purple Heart. When Afghanistan collapsed, he went back into Afghanistan, like snuck back in. And we had Pineapple Express running and other volunteer groups working our phones, and he and other guys on the ground were actually moving people through the sewage canals and coordinating with our groups to get people out. And so Legend and I became very good friends. We're still to this day dear, more like brothers. And Legend works very closely with the Afghan resistance even today. And so he sneaks back into the country. That's why he goes by the term Legend and not his actual name. He lives in the United States, but goes back and forth to Afghanistan and fights in the resistance and, does things there. And when he was there a couple of years ago, the Taliban had recently taken over the country, and they had pulled down all the American flags from the bases and the embassies, and they were burning them. And so Legend managed to rescue 4 flags at great risk to himself and sneak them out of the country and bring them back to America. And he presented me and our cast with one of those flags at our play Last Out when we performed in Franklin, and Sean Ryan was there. And so that was one of the 4 flags that were saved from Afghanistan. And I put it up as a reminder to, everybody that watches the show that there was a deep, deep cost for that war. And that just like that flag, we're scuffed up, but we're still here.
Our guest today has been Lieutenant Colonel Scott Mann. The book is entitled Nobody is Coming to Save You. The message is so much more. Lieutenant Colonel, it's been an honor to have you on today. Thank you so much for sharing your story, even just the tip of the iceberg with us. It's been a joy to have you on. There's so much more there. Check out his book, check out his website and materials to follow. And thank you so much for your service and for spending some time with us.
Thanks, guys. I really enjoyed it. Thanks for what you do.
That's a wrap for this episode. We hope that you enjoyed your time with Lieutenant Colonel. It's amazing to hear from him. The man is chock full of stories, and you can hear a large part of his stories in his book, Nobody is Coming to Save You. Hope that you enjoyed this episode. And I tell you what, we were all over the place in terms of impact on what this can mean, not only for you, but obviously for many people that you probably know in your networks and your circles. If you know somebody who's struggling with suicide, you can send this to them. If you know somebody who feels that they don't have much of a story or that they're defeated, you can send this to them. If you know somebody who is looking to build relationships and learn how to be a bridge builder, you can send us them. And of course, if you fit into any one or more of those categories, you can listen to this another time. Great episode with Scott today. It's been good to have him on. We hope that you enjoyed it, and let him know that you did too. I'm sure you can find him on the social media channels as well. We sure love to hear from you too on what you enjoyed about the episode. And we're going to choose to leave you now with our weekly challenge, which means to wake up every single morning and waste no day.